Hey, welcome to week 3. This week was an interesting one for me. I didn't feel like I really got that much done. We talked through some database stuff, which is really much more Daniel's area of expertise. So I paid attention, but I didn't really suggest too much. Daniel's been working a lot in terms of the framework of the back end, even identifying what it is we actually need versus what would be nice to have, and then figuring out what the ideal service is to actually make that happen. I've mentioned a few weeks ago, and I think I mentioned it in both weeks, that the big question that we kind of come back to regularly is how much do we want to invest out of pocket versus not? And so that's a factor, but beyond that, what about scalability? Are we even able to provide the scalability that we would need if this thing becomes successful? Or then on the flip side, how much money are we out if this does not become successful? So those are all things that we're kind of wrangling and processing through. We also talked about some of the major structural things. How are we going to do level selection? How are we going to do multiplayer versus single player? How do you get to the new levels of single player? All of those kinds of things. And so I'll show you a little bit of the interface solution that we've come up with so far. And by we, I mean mostly Daniel. I designed some squares, and then he put them into place. And so it's a real rough prototype, but it's fun to be able to see these things starting to fall into place a little bit. Next, I spent actually a good amount of time playing games this week. Part of that was because I didn't have a lot of time to dedicate to just development and design. And so I was looking at how other games use certain features, what are game experiences, ways that they introduce advertising or not, things that help you want to progress in a game, just all of those kinds of things, trying to become more and more aware of them. I think what often happens, it's a weird tension, when all three of us play games, and so we would consider ourselves gamers. And so there's an interesting problem that happens is we end up designing a game that's just for gamers. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but I don't think we've necessarily taken a step back and understood what are the elements that make a game work and what are the elements that make a game not work. I think often gamers will assess that simply by how they feel about the game after they've played it. So we'll take Mario. I'm a big Nintendo fan, which is funny in this day and age. They used to dominate, and now they seem to kind of be the butt of the joke. But there's just something special about a Mario game. They're very well polished, they're refined, but I've never really sat down and said, okay, what specifically is it about the game that makes it really fun for me? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I would replicate that. And so you even see that with a lot of games. They kind of copy what they think to be the model of Mario. And so you go from the left side of your screen to the right side of your screen, and you collect coins along the way, and 100 gives you a free man. Well, that's not really the mechanic that makes the game so successful. And so I've been trying to identify on a deeper level, what are the things, and some of them are real subtle motivators. Some of them are just a minor accomplishment that sort of reminds you to keep playing the game. So, these aren't high-level things necessarily, but I've been trying to really identify what those are so that we can apply the effective principles to Mealtime. Also, in terms of the work that I actually did, I started working on the design for the Taco Shop card deck, and it was way slower than I thought it was going to be. One of the things that I continue to forget is that the simplicity of the illustrations that I try to accomplish doesn't mean that they're fast and that they're easy. It means that there are few elements to accentuate, and because of that, I need to be very intentional about what I choose to accentuate and to spend time creating. So last night was the first time I sat down this week, and I said, all right, my goal is to get the whole deck done tonight. I'm thinking to myself, we already have the values, so the calorie values, and it's all balanced. We have all those things figured out. We know what cards we're going to be creating. It's not like, should I do this one or should I do that one? All of that's finished. I already have the template of the card sizes. The files are all set up correctly. I have multiple artboards. I know how many of each type of card. All of those complexities are gone, so I should be able to knock it all out. Instead, I didn't even finish the entree cards for the taco shop. I only got 4 cards finished, and so that puts me in a frustrating spot a little bit, because I feel like now all of a sudden I'm in some way holding up development because we can't implement a new environment or a new scene until I'm finished with all of the cards for it. And so now I'm kind of feeling like I'm behind, and so I'm going to try to pound out a ton of cards this week. My goal will be to finish the deck for the taco shop, as well as design the environment for the diner. We have the diner cards finished because that was the original set. That was the original kind of theme for the card game. So I'll try to make better progress on that. And then the last thing is more of kind of a philosophical thing. As we're talking through all these different elements of the card game and interface and all these kinds of things, one of the things that we keep running into is an element that feels like it's required. And so I take a weird approach on this maybe. I feel like to some extent you start with an idea, you start with a premise, and then you begin working toward a goal. But then through the process, you allow the process to reveal what needs to happen. And so in this case, the user interface has changed because it has been revealed to us through our testing, through our prototypes, through the coding that Daniel has done, and through the design work that I've done, and then even the contributions of Evan along the way. Like, all of these things have come together to sort of reveal different elements of things. And so we come up with a user interface that we're happy with and a game board that we feel like is pretty close to there. And then as we begin playing it, we realize, there's something that's missing. And so one of the things Daniel mentioned this week to me was it's hard to know whose turn it is. So there's a little indicator that pops up and it says so-and-so's turn, so-and-so's turn, but it's on the little, on the user interface, it pops up above the player's little icon. Well, it's effective in the sense that if you're looking for it, you can find it, but there's nothing visual. I guess there's nothing overtly visual or overtly clear about whose turn it is and when things are moving. And so then we kind of figured out we need to add something else. And so what we can do is we can make a more obvious turn counter or a turn token or whatever it is, or the suggestion was on the bottom of the user interface to add a little tag that says Evan is playing or Daniel is playing. And so as we were going back and forth on it, one of the things that we talked through was, well, why don't we have some fun with this? Why don't we say Matt is chopping vegetables, or Evan is stirring a pot? And so now all of a sudden we weave in the game's theme a little bit tighter to the experience, while also accomplishing one of these necessities that we've discovered along the way is important and valuable for the game experience. And so that's one of those things where I think the ideas are, they're pretty loose and they're pretty fluid, and I think that's a really good thing. At some point you have to draw the line, and at some point you say, nope, this is what we're doing and this is what it's going to be like. But in this phase, this far out from a launch, and even as we're just in the process of development, I think it's really important to be open and willing to move away from what you assume to be the case or the best solution. So just like the UI stuff last week, man, we went back and forth and we threw away a ton of stuff. I was reading through Daniel's blog post from last week, and we threw away probably 8 different user interface design ideas just because they weren't working. And so the process can feel tedious and long at times, but at the end of the day, you need to get rid of the things that are not necessary. And you need to do that in order to make it a better final piece and a more enjoyable game. So those are kind of the things that were going on this week. I'll show you, this is where we've landed so far with the user, kind of the interface to switch between games. And so you have, in this case, there's American Diner, and then there's Taco Shop, and then when you tap on it, it takes you into the game board. And so now you can see, here's our table, here's our different characters. Actually, it's all the same character at this point. Eventually, you will have different characters. And so then there's a hand. I got 3 entrees and 3 sabotage cards. So how about that? So anyway, that's kind of where we're at. And then the other thing I'll show you, since we're here, is some of the taco deck, the cards that I have developed. So I worked on quesadilla, which I think you can see adequately, enchiladas, crispy tacos or crunchy tacos or hard tacos or crisp shell tacos or whatever you want to call them, depending on where you order them. And then what is probably my favorite is the nachos or super nachos or super chips or whatever it is that you want to be referencing them as. The other thing that's fun to me about this card, the nachos, 2 things. One, it is the highest card calorie in the game. And my absolute favorite is the jalapenos. I love the jalapenos. They were really fun to draw. It's so fun when you're working on a project and there's these little elements that come along and they just become the thing that endear you to that specific piece or that illustration or that project or whatever it is. And so for me, with the nachos, it's the jalapenos. I'm looking forward to a more productive week next week. Hopefully, we'll have the whole taco shop portion done. I'm probably going to revisit the user interface a little bit where you're swiping between different available options. One of the things I've contemplated is actually illustrating a storefront as opposed to just a box that sort of holds the text and the character. I'm also going to go through the process of designing the specific characters that represent each shop. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about, I love eating at local restaurants and small shops. I have fond memories eating at a small Mexican food place near where I went to high school and where my parents still live. And so because of that, I'm familiar with what the guy who runs the shop looks like. I know him and I know he's still running the shop and they're doing great and all these things. And so what I'm going to get the opportunity to do is illustrate each of these characters. So for the taco shop, I'm going to do some degree of caricature of him, maybe a merge between him and another guy that runs a Mexican food shop that I love. Same thing with Chinese food or Italian food or American diner, whatever it is we end up finalizing on those final sets. I'm going to do kind of an in homage to these chefs and these cooks that run these little restaurants that are so fun to frequent. So, because food really is kind of the core element of the game. And I think for me, one of the reasons I love working on the project is because it's just really fun to draw food for me for some reason. I'm always even drawn to other illustrators in the way that they illustrate food. So I think it's a really fun thing to be able to do that. But hopefully next week we'll have a completed deck and I can show you some more of the options and the different cards that we've come up with. So until then, see you next week.